Welcome to your deep dive. Today we're pointing our analytical lens at a really highly specific but deeply evocative piece of media history, one that you asked us to examine.
Yeah, we have a single, very concentrated source text in front of us today.
Right, but the implications within it, they stretch across, well, 4 decades of cultural and technological shifts.
They really do. It's a fascinating look at how media evolves.
So our mission today is to decode the opening moments of a broadcast titled 100th Episode Spectacular Second Intro.mp4.
Quite a specific file name there.
It is, yeah. It's the introduction to a YouTube broadcast by John Dubber, the creator behind True Oldies HQ.
And what we're looking at here is a veteran broadcaster who is pausing at this major digital milestone to reflect on a career that began, long before the internet was a public utility.
Exactly. And the brevity of this excerpt, it's actually deceptive.
Oh, absolutely. It functions as a roadmap of media evolution. We are essentially looking at a first-hand account of the transition from the heavily regulated, very physically demanding world of terrestrial analog radio.
Right? All the way to the decentralized, borderless environment of modern digital content creation.
Yeah, that leap is massive.
It is. And the central tension we want you, the listener, to hold on to as we navigate this is how a curator maintains their authority. How do they keep the emotional integrity of their chosen genre?
In this case, 1950s rock and roll.
Exactly. How do they keep that alive while the very foundations of how media is delivered are just repeatedly ripped up and replaced?
That's the core question. How does the soul of a local 1982 radio broadcast survive the jump to a global YouTube stream?
Right. And to help me analyze this trajectory, I am joined by our resident expert. Let's just begin by looking at the specific phrasing the presenter uses to open this milestone broadcast.
Let's do it.
He welcomes the audience to YouTube show 100 and immediately sets an expectation. Says, we hope we've got 100 memories for you and certainly 100 minutes of fantastic true oldies.
The numerical symmetry there is very deliberate.
It is.
But it's really the psychological equivalence he establishes that warrants closer inspection. He's equating a unit of time, minute, with a unit of human experience, which is a memory.
100 minutes, 100 memories.
Exactly. Hitting 100 episodes of a long-form broadcast is a significant logistical achievement in any format, obviously, but within the context of the True Oldies HQ project, it represents the construction of a massive, meticulously categorized archive.
I kind of want to challenge the concept of the archive for a moment, though.
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
Because when we think of an archive, we usually think of this academic, sterile environment.
Yeah.
Like a dusty library of files.
Right, something very static.
Yeah. But Dubber's phrasing, prioritizing the word memories alongside minutes, it suggests something much more active. He doesn't view the music merely as historical artifacts or, just sound waves to be cataloged.
No, he views them as cognitive triggers.
Yes. For the audience of 1950s rock and roll, this music is intrinsically tied to formative experiences.
And that touches on a well-documented psychological phenomenon. It's known as the reminiscence bump.
The reminiscence bump. Okay, break that down for us.
Well, people tend to retain a disproportionately high number of vivid memories from their adolescence and early adulthood. It's just how our brains encode that period of rapid change.
So for the demographic that considers 1950s rock and roll to be their defining soundtrack.
Exactly. These specific chord progressions, the vocal harmonies, those lyrical themes, they're permanently fused to their first experiences of independence, romance, identity formation, all of it.
So by promising 100 memories, Dubber is really acknowledging the profound psychological weight of the material he's handling.
He is. He's positioning himself not merely as a disc jockey playing tracks, but really as a custodian of his audience's personal histories.
Which brings us to a compelling contrast with how we consume music today. I mean, think about it. If you want to listen to 100 minutes of 1950s rock and roll right now, you don't actually need a veteran broadcaster.
Not at all. You can just open a streaming platform.
Right, you select a mood or a genre, and an algorithm will generate an infinite, completely frictionless playlist. The software will analyze the tempo, the key signatures, global listening habits, and it just serves you a seamless stream of audio.
It's highly efficient.
It is. So, in an environment where infinite personalized audio is essentially free and instantaneous, what is the inherent value of a human-curated 100-minute broadcast?
Well, the distinction lies entirely between consumption and curation. Algorithmic streaming is highly efficient at providing audio, sure, but it is fundamentally devoid of narrative and context.
Because it's just math.
Exactly. An algorithm selects a rockabilly track to follow a doo-wop track because the metadata suggests a smooth audio transition, or maybe because user retention metrics dictate that pairing. It's a mathematical process.
Right.
But human curation, particularly from someone who has been deeply embedded in the genre for 40 years, that relies on emotional intelligence and historical awareness.
So you're saying the algorithm lacks the capacity for cultural empathy.
That's a great way to put it, yes.
It knows what the song is, but it doesn't know why the song matters to the listener on a Tuesday evening versus, say, a Sunday morning.
Precisely. A curator like John Dubber understands the topography of the genre. He knows the tension that existed between different artists, the regional variations in the sound, the societal context in which these records were originally released and consumed.
So when he sequences a 100-minute show, he is crafting a deliberate arc.
Right. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. He might place a really high-energy Little Richard track next to a much more subdued ballad, not for algorithmic flow, but to highlight a specific contrast in the 1950s musical landscape.
And the audience tunes in for that guiding hand. They want to trust the driver, not just ride in an autonomous vehicle.
Yes, and that trust is the currency of his entire operation.
And the source text makes it very clear that this trust wasn't generated overnight, nor was it born in the digital era.
Far from it.
Right. Immediately after establishing that 100-episode milestone, Dubber pivots sharply to his origins. He says, great opportunity for me to go back and think about days gone by. Think about the days that I first went into radio back in 1982. We worked with flip-start turntables and cart machines.
Slip-start turntables and cart machines.
Yeah. Now, as people who study media history, we understand the mechanical function of slip-starting a record. You know, you do it to bypass the slow acceleration of a turntable platter on live air. And we know what a continuous loop tape cartridge is.
Right, the old Kurtz.
But I'm actually more interested in the cognitive and philosophical impact of that specific environment. What does operating in such an intensely physical, unforgiving medium do to a broadcaster?
It creates a fundamentally different relationship with the concept of broadcasting itself. In 1982, radio was a high-stakes, real-time performance.
It really was.
The slip-start turntable and cart machine era demanded immense physical dexterity and split-second timing. The broadcaster was physically manipulating the medium.
Holding the vinyl record against the spinning felt mat.
Exactly. You're holding it there, timing the release to the exact millisecond your vocal introduction ended, while simultaneously operating bulky tape machines for jingles and station IDs.
The margin for error was virtually non-existent. I mean, in modern digital broadcasting, if you click a file a second late, there's just a tiny pause. No big deal.
Right, maybe a second of silence.
But in 1982 analog radio, a miscue meant dead air, which was the ultimate failure of a broadcaster. Millions of listeners suddenly hearing nothing but the static hum of the transmitter. Or, even worse, a clumsy transition where two tracks clash awkwardly.
It was incredibly stressful. The cognitive load of managing that machinery forces a presenter to be hyper-present.
You literally can't afford to zone out.
No, you cannot passively consume the music you are broadcasting when your hands are physically required to deliver it. This tactile engagement instills a deep structural respect for the audio. You are inspecting the physical grooves of the vinyl. You are managing the tension of the tape. Music, in this era, was a physical object that demanded care.
I'd argue that this physical discipline shapes the editorial mindset as well.
How so?
Well, when the physical act of playing a song requires that much effort and coordination, you don't select your playlist flippantly. You are highly deliberate about what earns a place on that turntable.
That is a critical insight, yeah. The mechanical constraints of 1982 radio actually served as an editorial filter.
Right. You couldn't just drag and drop 100 files into a queue like you do today.
Every song transition was a physical event.
Yeah.
So when a broadcaster trained in that crucible transitions to the digital world where they can just trigger a song with a mouse click, they bring that ingrained discipline with them.
They don't just abandon their training.
No, they approach a digital playlist with the exact same gravity and respect for timing that they applied to a slip-start turntable. The tools have become effortless, sure, but their methodology remains rooted in the rigorous demands of the physical era.
And that transition from the physical to the effortless is explicitly addressed in the next phase of the source text. Dubber notes, of course, things have changed dramatically since that point. The world of digitization, where all sorts of things can be accomplished. Let's really examine this world of digitization for a second. Because for a niche format like 1950s rock and roll, the shift from terrestrial radio to a platform like YouTube isn't just a change in audio format.
Not at all.
It is a total reconfiguration of the audience paradigm.
It represents the complete collapse of geographic boundaries. Think about it. In 1982, regardless of a broadcaster's skill, their reach was entirely dictated by the wattage of their station's transmitter and the curvature of the Earth.
You are inherently a local or regional voice.
Exactly. The audience was a physically bound community. The sorts of things that can be accomplished with digitization refer primarily to aggregation. YouTube allows a broadcaster to aggregate a massively dispersed audience.
But consider the potential downside of that. Doesn't the removal of geographic boundaries risk diluting the community aspect that terrestrial radio fostered?
What do you mean?
Well, when you are broadcasting to your own city, you share the weather, the local news, the cultural mood of that specific day. When you broadcast to the entire globe, you lose that shared physical reality.
That's true. You lose the geographic reality, but you gain a hyper-specific cultural reality. Digital platforms facilitate parasocial relationships based entirely on shared niche interests rather than shared zip codes.
I see.
So Dubber may no longer be speaking to just one city, but he is speaking to a global micro-community that is far more dedicated to the specific subgenre of 1950s rock and roll than a general local radio audience ever would be. The intimacy shifts from geographic proximity to cultural proximity.
Cultural proximity, that's a really powerful way to frame it. And that cultural proximity is anchored by what I find to be the most profound statement in the entire excerpt.
Which line is that?
Right after acknowledging the limitless capabilities of the digital world, Dubber immediately grounds his philosophy by adding, but nothing can be accomplished more than providing the fantastic music that we heard as we grew up.
Wow.
He is explicitly rejecting the trap of technological determinism right there. He is stating that the medium, whether it's an AM radio wave or a fiber optic broadband connection, is secondary. The technology is merely the logistics. The music is the mission.
It's a remarkable declaration of intent, really, because it's very easy for creators to become enamored with the capabilities of new technology.
Oh, totally. High-definition video, complex audio processing, interactive community features.
Right, but Dubber recognizes that these are tools, not the product itself. The core value proposition of True Oldies HQ is identical to the value proposition of his radio shows in 1982. It's the emotional delivery of the music.
It makes me think of an architectural restoration.
Okay.
Like you might use modern laser-guided tools to shore up the foundation of a 200-year-old building. But the goal isn't to show off the lasers. The goal is to ensure the historical structure remains standing exactly as it was intended to be seen.
That's a perfect analogy.
Dubber is using the global infrastructure of Google servers to ensure that a 1956 Chuck Berry B-side hits the listener's ear with the same cultural force it had 70 years ago. The modern delivery system is invisible. Only the historical artifact matters.
Yes. And his ability to make that historical artifact matter to a modern audience is directly tied to the authority he spent decades building.
Which he outlines for us.
Right. The text provides a specific geographic and institutional timeline of how that authority was actually forged. He details his journey, saying, "I've been fortunate enough to play oldies music for over 40 years. I started with Radio 6, which became Curtain Radio. I worked at Capital Radio, a very important period of my life. I also have programs that have gone to air interstate and locally, of course, and also at regional stations."
We really need to analyze this specific institutional history, particularly his time at Curtain Radio in Western Australia, because it provides the vital context for his current status as a custodian of the genre.
It does. We are not talking about a generic syndicated pop format here.
No, we're not. To understand the weight of this resume, we have to look at the media landscape of Perth and Western Australia during those decades.
The isolation factor.
Exactly. Perth is famously one of the most geographically isolated major cities on the planet. In the pre-internet era, radio, there wasn't just passive entertainment, it was the primary cultural tether to the rest of the world. And simultaneously, it was the strongest builder of local community identity.
That geographic isolation created a very unique media ecology. Commercial stations in the 1980s and 90s were rapidly consolidating and standardizing their formats, leaning really heavily into contemporary pop and generic classic rock just to maximize broad advertising revenue.
Right, just playing the hits.
Yeah. So niche genres, specific subcultures, and historical music preservation were increasingly pushed out of the commercial spectrum entirely.
Which is where community and university-affiliated stations come in.
Exactly. Stations like 927, 6NR, which evolved into Curtain Radio, became culturally vital.
Curtain radio wasn't just a spot on the dial. It was an institution. It became the sanctuary for specialized broadcasting in Western Australia. When Dubber established himself there, he wasn't just taking callers and playing requests. He was actively cultivating and preserving the 1950s rock and roll subculture.
And the audience that tuned into a station like 6NR for oldies was highly discerning.
Oh, they definitely were.
They weren't looking for the surface-level hits. They lived through the era. They knew the session musicians. They knew the rivalries between the record labels. They knew the distinct tonal differences between Memphis rockabilly and New York doo-wop.
You cannot bluff an audience like that. Establishing yourself as an authoritative figure on a station like Curtain Radio meant proving your bona fides every single time you open the microphone.
Absolutely.
Dubber had to possess an encyclopedic knowledge of the genre, sure, but he also had to understand the specific emotional resonance that this music held for the Western Australian audience. He became a trusted community leader. His presence on the airwaves validated their cultural memory.
And the text shows that this highly localized, intensely specific authority was ultimately scalable.
Yes, the syndication.
Right. He mentions moving to Capital Radio, which he designates as a very important period, and having programs syndicated interstate and locally, and also at regional stations.
In the era of terrestrial radio, achieving interstate syndication for a niche genre is just a massive validation of the broadcaster's curation.
It really is. Syndication meant that station managers in completely different geographic markets recognized that Dubber's specific approach to the music had universal appeal. The curation that worked for the dedicated oldies community in Perth was robust enough to engage audiences all across the country.
So he transcended being a local personality and became a recognized national custodian of the 1950s sound.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the sheer scale of the timeline he mentions. Over 40 years. 4 decades of navigating changing formats, shifting station management, evolving listener habits, all while remaining anchored to a musical era that ended before his broadcasting career even began.
Longevity of that magnitude fundamentally alters a broadcaster's relationship with their audience.
How so?
Well, over 40 years, Dubber hasn't just played the music. He has watched his audience age. He has seen the original artists of the 1950s pass into history.
Yeah, that's true.
He has outlasted the vinyl record, the cassette tape, the compact disc, and the MP3. In a media landscape defined by rapid obsolescence, his enduring presence provides a profound sense of stability for his listeners. He is the constant variable.
He is the living bridge to their past, which makes the final sentence of his introduction so incredibly potent. As he prepares to launch into the music for this 100th episode, he summarizes his entire professional arc in a single 3-stage progression.
The pipeline.
The pipeline. He says from record collector to radio disc jockey, from radio disc jockey to YouTuber.
It's a perfect summary.
Let's really break down this evolutionary pipeline because it perfectly mirrors the democratization of media over the last half-century.
It begins with the foundational identity, the record collector. This is the critical baseline of his authority. Before there's an audience, before there is a transmitter, there is simply the inward, obsessive passion for the physical artifacts of the music. A record collector operates as an archivist. They spend years hunting down obscure pressings, comparing mono and stereo mixes, studying liner notes.
And the collector is driven by reverence for the material, not by a desire for a public platform. This is the stage where the deep encyclopedic knowledge we discussed earlier is accumulated.
Exactly.
If you skip this stage and jump straight to broadcasting, your curation lacks soul. The record collector mentality guarantees that the foundation of the enterprise is built on authentic passion.
Then you have the second stage, the radio disc jockey.
The professionalization phase.
Yes, it represents the professionalization of that passion. The collector takes their private archive and brings it into an institutional setting. This is where they learn the craft of presentation, the timing, the vocal control, the ability to build a narrative arc across a playlist.
But the radio disc jockey stage is inherently constrained.
Highly constrained.
You are suddenly answering to program directors, station managers, advertisers. You're bound by format clocks that dictate exactly when you must play a station ID, when you must break for a commercial, and sometimes exactly which songs you're allowed to play.
You lose a lot of autonomy.
You do. The institution provides the platform and the transmitter, but it demands editorial compromise in return. The broadcaster is essentially a tenant in someone else's house.
Which is exactly why the final transition from radio disc jockey to YouTuber is the ultimate emancipation for a niche curator.
The digital platform completely disintermediates the broadcast process.
It does. YouTube eliminates the station manager, the format clock, the geographic limitations of the transmitter. It offers the broadcaster total editorial control combined with unprecedented global reach.
But let me ask you this. Does the complete lack of institutional constraint on platforms like YouTube also lower the barrier to entry so much that it becomes difficult for audiences to find genuine authority? I mean, if anyone can be a YouTuber, doesn't the title lose its weight?
That is the paradox of democratized media. The barrier to entry is zero, which means the platform is flooded with noise. But that exact environment is what makes John Dubber's trajectory so valuable. He didn't start as a YouTuber.
Ah, I see.
He arrives on the digital platform armed with 40 years of institutional discipline, technical mastery, and deeply vetted authority. He brings the rigorous editorial standards of terrestrial analog radio to a platform defined by algorithmic chaos.
He's an institutional heavyweight operating in a decentralized frontier. He has the unfiltered freedom of his early record collector days, combined with the polished, authoritative presentation skills forged at places like Curtin Radio, all delivered directly to a global congregation of oldies fans.
It is the perfect synthesis of passion, professional discipline, and technological leverage.
It really is.
It represents the realization that while the institutions of media will inevitably crumble and reform, the direct relationship between a knowledgeable guide and an eager audience remains resilient. Dubber's journey proves that true authority doesn't rely on the radio tower. It relies on the depth of the curator's understanding and their commitment to the material.
Think about your own pursuits for a moment.
Mhm.
Whether it's a professional career, an academic focus, or a deeply held personal hobby, consider how the landscape around your passion has shifted over the years. You've likely had to adapt to new tools, new platforms, new ways of connecting with others who share your interests.
We all have.
The narrative we are decoding today is fundamentally about adaptation without compromise. It is about allowing the delivery mechanism to evolve while fiercely protecting the core emotional payload.
We spend a significant amount of cultural energy analyzing the disruptions of new technology. We focus on what is lost when we move from vinyl to digital, or from local radio to global streaming.
Yeah, that's usually the focus.
But this source text offers a powerful counter-narrative of continuity. The medium changes, the hardware changes, the geographic boundaries dissolve, but the fundamental human desire to be guided through a landscape of memory by a trusted voice remains entirely intact.
We've covered immense territory in this analysis. We began with a seemingly simple welcome message for a digital broadcast milestone and decoded a 40-year history of media evolution.
It's been quite a journey.
We examined the intense physical demands of the 1982 analog studio, where slip-start turntables forced broadcasters to treat music as a tactile, fragile object. We analyzed how the geographic isolation of Western Australia, and specifically the cultural sanctuary of Curtin Radio, forged an unshakable localized authority that eventually scaled to a national and then global audience.
And we explored the psychology of memory, the limitations of algorithmic streaming versus human curation, and the ultimate liberation of the broadcaster, transitioning from the constraints of terrestrial radio to the decentralized freedom of YouTube. If there is a singular takeaway from dissecting this introduction, it is the enduring power of the archivist in an era of infinite content. As media becomes increasingly automated and frictionless, the value of context, history, and human empathy in curation only compounds.
It's more important than ever.
Exactly. The tools of 1982 and the tools of today are vastly different, but the responsibility of delivering the emotional weight of true oldies to an audience that relies on that music for their sense of self has not changed in 40 years.
The human element is the irreducible core of the broadcast. And that leaves us with a lingering question for you to consider as you navigate your own media consumption. We've spent this time examining how a deeply physical, analog era of music 1950s rock and roll, born on heavy vinyl and shellac, successfully translated its soul into the intangible digital landscape of modern streaming.
It's a massive shift.
But look forward to the next 40 years. When the generations who have grown up entirely within the digital ecosystem, whose entire musical history consists of rented data on a server, are eventually ready for their own version of True Oldies, how will those memories be archived and presented?
That's a fascinating thought.
When the music of your youth was never a physical object you could hold, scratch, or slip-start, who will be the custodians capable of anchoring that digital nostalgia, and what tools will they use to prove their authority? It is a complex horizon to consider. Thank you for bringing this fascinating piece of audio history to our attention and for joining us on this deep dive. Keep examining the media around you. We'll be back next time to decode another text.